Hello and welcome to the latest episode of MPP Insider, your source for all the latest news in the marijuana policy reform movement. I'm Mike Meno, and I'm joined today by MPP's Director of Government Relations, Aaron Houston. Aaron, how's it going?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be on the MPP Insider.
Oh yeah, our first special guest. Thanks for being here. We have Aaron today to talk about some of the ongoing Mexican cartel violence that has been making the headlines. But first of all, I want to draw everyone's attention to our boycott of Walmart that we announced yesterday morning. The Marijuana Policy Project is calling on shoppers all across the country to no longer shop at Walmart until they end their discriminatory practice of firing medical marijuana patients who are legal under state law. This sparks from a case in Michigan. An employee, his name is Joe Cassius, a 29-year-old sinus cancer survivor who has an inoperable brain tumor. After working dutifully at a Walmart for 5 years, was fired because he tested positive for marijuana during a drug screen. This is a guy who uses marijuana as a medicine with his doctor's recommendation under state law, and we think we need to draw attention to the plight suffered by patients in 14 medical marijuana states who are getting bullied by employers, and it's just not right. You have any thoughts on that, Aaron? Before we move on?
Always low ethical standards, always. It's just absolutely terrible what they're doing. They're also, not to mention the fact that plenty of patients around the country take the pill form of THC, which is a pharmaceutical product, and there's only one lab, it's called Marinol, there's only one lab in the entire country, which is, by the way, the NIDA lab with Dr. El Soli in the University of Mississippi, that can actually tell the difference between medical marijuana, in other words, botanical marijuana, and the Marinol pill.
Which is legal in all 50 states.
Which is legal in all 50 states. It's approved by the FDA. And so it's worth noting as well that this puts actually a great many people at risk.
Yeah, so check that out. Go to our website, mpp.org. You can find out how to contact Walmart to voice your displeasure, read more about the case. But now we're going to turn to Mexico, which has been making headlines this week. There was the killing of a U.S. consulate worker and her husband, and a third person. Aaron, why don't you tell us what's going on down there?
Well, this weekend's violence marks a troubling new trend in the Mexican war. Recently we saw, we've seen obviously 18,000 people die in violent deaths since Calderon announced his war on the cartels in 2006. And of course, as we know, this method, this tired old method, does not work. It didn't work in Colombia. It's not working in Mexico. All that it's actually done in Mexico is give the cartels an incredible amount of power. It's also funneled a lot of arms into the hands of the cartels and a lot of drug money as well. Most people don't know that 70% of the cartel's profits from the United States come from marijuana sales alone. And that's a remarkable figure, of course. And it's not because the cartels are growing it in Mexico and trucking it across the border. It's because they're active in 230 American cities, which makes most people's jaws drop.
Mind-blowing.
It's incredible. And why is that? It's because of our marijuana laws. You can trace it directly back to the marijuana prohibition. It's also worth noting that the cartels, when the market went south, the housing market in particular went south, in 2006 and 2007, the cartels were the cash-richest operations in the world, actually. And so they were the only operations who had the ability to go into foreclosed markets and buy up a bunch of foreclosed homes. You know, you can imagine these subdivisions in suburban Phoenix that were growing, booming during the 90s, half-finished. You sitting on a whole foreclosed subdivision, the cartel comes in, they have the cash to buy that up, they turn them into grow houses. The locals are happy because they don't know who's actually buying the house. They don't have to do well house checks anymore on these things. And as well, of course, the banks don't mind it, which we saw as evidence when of course, evidence of that when the UN drug czar noted that during the market crash in 2007, half of the world's $352 billion in drug proceeds was sunk into banks, actually, to keep the whole world market afloat.
Actually, something you told me the other day that I was surprised at is that Phoenix is now the world kidnapping, it's the kidnapping capital of the world.
It is the Phoenix, Arizona. Is the kidnapping capital
of the world.
City,
and that's directly linked to this cartel violence.
Exactly right.
And the prohibition that's fueling it. What's our government's response to this?
Well, our government's response is to weekly say that we're not fighting a war on drugs anymore. We commend a lot of what the Obama administration has done in terms of medical marijuana. We certainly commend Director Kurlikowski, Drug Czar Kurlikowski, Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, on taking a less harsh tone than his predecessor, which is not hard, by the way. His predecessor really was absolutely crazy in some of the things he said. But at the same time, when Director Kurlikowski says, "I've ended the war on drugs," it's sort of like declaring the sky green, because he hasn't actually changed any policies. They haven't changed any policies. He's saying they're not waging a war on people anymore in this country, but not a single policy has changed in that regard. And the Obama administration, sadly, has discounted the idea of letting states decide their own marijuana policies because of political reasons. And they know just as well as the rest of us do, and just as most of the intelligence analysts in the military and our national security infrastructure know, that this will not end, this cartel violence, these wars will not end.
We're seeing American citizens being killed.
They're getting killed now, and let me get to that in a second, but they're not acknowledging that all of this stuff will not stop, all of these terrible events will not stop until we cut off those cartel profits. 70% of their profits come from marijuana sales alone, and it finances all of the rest of their drug trade, all of the cartel's drug trade.
Haven't we even seen on a lower level, I remember there was a front page article in the Washington Post showing that the emerging medical marijuana market in the West is, even that alone is taking some of these profits away from the cartels, stemming their profit line. So don't we know that ending marijuana prohibition entirely would do it even more?
Absolutely, we know that, but it's a people see it as a politically risky thing. Ironically, strangely, it's probably a lot less risky than the Obama administration thinks, and it's a lot less risky than the Republicans in Congress think. And we're doing our best right now to show them that there is actually a quiet consensus out there for changing our marijuana laws. But I would also like to note that this war has entered a new disturbing phase. Previously, now of course the cartels have been killing Americans in 230 American cities for years, but generally those folks are, the victims in general are connected in some way to the drug trade. They're in some way connected to the drug trafficking organizations who are targeting them. In this instance, this last weekend, one of the embassy workers was pregnant. I believe she was 6 months pregnant. They had a baby in the back seat. And it appears they were targeted exclusively because they worked at the consulate. And now the government, the U.S. is sort of, in my opinion, cynically claiming that they're not sure if this is a message to the United States. It's clearly a message to the United States. Both of the cars that were targeted in Ciudad Juarez this weekend were leaving the same children's birthday party. So it's pretty clear that
it's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. It's pretty clear that they were targeting them because the cartels were targeting these folks because of their association with the U.S. consulate in Ciudad Juarez. And this is a disturbing new phase. Now, this comes on the heels, of course, of the Obama administration announcing several weeks ago that we're going to be embedding intelligence advisors in Mexico with Mexican units, which I will note is how we got into the Vietnam War to begin with.
Right.
You know, John Kennedy sent intelligence advisors over to Vietnam as the first phase of our involvement in that war, and that should disturb Americans, by the way. Of course, you also have this last week the Congress passing a resolution condemning the cartel violence, basically acknowledging the status quo and not saying that we actually need to change the underlying policies.
And our current policies are obviously not working.
Exactly.
Just fueling this violence further. So
exactly.
Scary stuff.
And the last thing the cartels want, Mike, is for us to have legal marijuana in the United States.
Right. So think about that out there. You know, we're playing right into the cartel's hands. We're doing exactly what they want, which is furthering marijuana prohibition.
That's right.
All right, Aaron. Well, thanks for updating us on that.
Thank you.
Quick legislative updates around the United States. In Rhode Island this week, a commission put together to study the costs of marijuana prohibition in Rhode Island came out in favor of decriminalizing the possession of small amounts of marijuana. In South Dakota, activists there qualified enough signatures to get on the ballot in November 2010 for a medical marijuana bill. So in 2010, in November this year, South Dakotans will be able to vote whether or not they want a medical marijuana law. And in Kansas, we've had the first informational hearing ever in the state of Kansas on a proposed medical marijuana bill coming up. So small steps, but incremental change as always, and we remain optimistic. So for MPP Insider, I'm Mike Meno, joined this week by Aaron Houston. Aaron, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll talk to you guys next time.